Now, the next speaking slot is shared by Deputies Pearse Doherty and Mary Lou MacDonald. Deputy Pearse Doherty.
Well, Minister, here we are, summoned at short notice without any real information, bar the leaks that we've seen in the media over the last number of weeks. Your obviously spin doctors went into hyper mode trying to set the Irish public up for what would be a great new dawn being heralded by this government after 4 years of austerity. We've had your ministers with the selective leaks, and this was to be your opening salvo of the election campaign. Fianna Fáil used to start with the phrase, "It's showtime." The Fine Gael Labour government start with the spring statement, and what a damp squib it is. But you wouldn't need to be a bloodhound to smell an election in the air in Leinster House. What we've seen from this statement is the nod and wink promises and actions that will mean nothing to the vast majority of people out there for many months to come, if they materialise at all. And what today should have been about, Minister, is it should have been about a serious debate about the budget parameters and the options that are available to meet the needs of Irish society. Instead, what we have is this set piece. In the past, what we would have was the financial statement, the spring statement, or the Stability Programme update, being published, being scrutinised at Finance Committee, looking at the macro projections that are there, looking at the risks that are there, that are all in the pages that we do not have time to read here. But instead, this government went with an election salvo, trying to suggest to the Irish people that the bad old days are behind them and that the Fine Gael and Labour Party are a reform party, are a party that now cares about the elderly, now cares about the sick, about the vulnerable. Let's forget about all of the cuts to child benefit. Let's forget about the cuts to the young people on social welfare. Let's forget about the imposition of the austerity that we've unleashed on you for the last 4 years. But the Irish people are cute, Minister, and they've learnt a lot of lessons in the last number of years under this government and under the previous government. And they know about promises, they know about false promises, and they also know when an election is in the air and how political parties in government deal with the electorate at that time. And once again, all the talk about political reform and a new way of having our budget debated and all that is gone out of the window. Today was the first chapter in the budget 2016. Unfortunately, the next chapter will be after the decisions that the government have made and will be announced in October, because this government is not genuine in relation to political reform. It's very clear, and the facts show it, that this government, your government, Minister, is an unfair and regressive government. You were unfair in the recession, and you will be even unfair in the recovery. And how do we know that? We know because we've lived under 4 years of your government. We know because we've seen what you've done with resources that were available to the state in the last budget, where the ESRI independently says of all of the politicians in this House that the impact of Budget 2015 meant that the 40% wealthiest in society benefited, and the more you had, the more you got from this government, while the 60% others were left behind and actually lost out. And again, the less you had, the more you lost out. And you can shake your head till the cows come home, but the ESRI have stated that on Budget 15 with the impact of water charges, and they've produced nice graphs to show that. And this is a government in denial. A fair recovery could start today with a commitment to abolish Irish water and water charges. That's what Sinn Féin would do. That's what Sinn Féin would announce in the spring statement. A fair recovery would mean an end to the family home tax. Again, that is what we would do. A fair recovery would end the pushing of more and more of the tax burden onto the narrow shoulders of struggling families. These are the choices you had, and these are the choices you didn't take. With respect, Ministers, you do this every time I get to this speech. I didn't open my mouth once when the both of you had your 25 minutes to give your address, 45 minutes to give your address, but yet I've only started, and again you're bickering, sniping and all the rest, because the truth sometimes is hard to swallow. And I understand that, and I understand your big day isn't going down as well as you planned in the strategy rooms of Labour and Fine Gael. But the truth is that you have shifted the tax burden onto low and middle income families, onto the families that are struggling. But there is a positive vision of a society and an economy, and it's one that Sinn Féin hold. We would get rid of bad and unfair austerity taxes, like water charges and the family home tax. But the most radical thing we would do, and I would ask the ministers to listen to this, the most radical thing we would do is we would keep our promises. Because nobody likes paying tax, let's be clear about that there. But we're not afraid in saying that those who can should pay some more. We think it is the right thing to do to ask those individuals that are earning above €100,000, when the top 1% owns 12% of the wealth in the state, to pay a little bit more. And we also think, as we see in the media and confirmed by yourself, Minister, that on the day that you promise a tax cut to the Taoiseach, to yourself, Minister, and other politicians, and pay rises for politicians, that this is appalling on the same day when 368 people are lying in trolleys. It is simply wrong. The whole setup today is based on dishonesty. The dishonest notion that this government has a mandate anymore is the principal one. They have long lost the trust of the Irish people. The other great dishonesty of this day is the notion that austerity worked. The third one is that we all made sacrifices. So let's be original and let's actually examine the facts. Let's judge it by the government's own predictions on coming to power. This government has met none of its claims it made for itself in coming to office. In the spring statement of 2011, issued in April of 2011, it said that the economy would grow by 8.7% from 2012 to 2014. In fact, the total growth of that time has been little more than half, at 4.7. And why is that? It is because your policy slowed the economy and even caused a double-dip recession. Personal spending is still 7% below where it was at the beginning of 2008, and it hasn't even recovered to the point it was when your government took office in 2011. Austerity has failed. Maybe not for all of your friends, all of your big donors in the past, all of the friends of Fine Gael, as we've seen recently, but the vast majority of people, for them, austerity has been a nightmare and a useless waste of years. We have seen fallen incomes for most families. Many people in work find themselves poor. Household incomes fell after this government took office. Benefits have been cut, everything from support to single parents to the respite care for the carers. Austerity has ravaged our public sector and our public services, and it's hollowed out public investment. Nearly all of our public services and public investment has been cut, and GDP growth has only benefited a few so far. This is because both government policy and the recovery are only for the few. GDP growth, such as it is, isn't being shared around. It is passing most people by. It is a one-sided recovery, benefiting only some parts and some people. And 7 years after the economy reached its peak, it is still more than 3% below that level at the end of 2014. Minister, the economy is only convalescing and hasn't fully recovered. And for most people, it hasn't even got that far. And this is the truth behind the government's talk of recovery for the last number of years. The truth is, in every downturn, it will find its end. Every recession bottoms out. The question we have to ask ourselves, did the government policies of the time deepen, lengthen and inflict pain on its citizens that it could have done without? And the answer is clear from the facts. Your government actually caused a double-dip recession after you took office in 2011 and prolonged the crisis. You talk that the recovery is fair, but the recovery and the growth in GDP is almost entirely from overseas sectors, net exports and net financial flows from overseas. It is widely accepted that these involve a large element of financial chicanery and accountancy practice that are designed to avail of very low taxation rates. Much of it has little to do with the real economy in Ireland. And I'm not saying all of it, Minister. I'm saying much of it. And we've seen again from the CSOs, the ESRI, talking about contract manufacturing, which bumped up GDP growth in 2014. I'm sure you won't deny those facts. Austerity began under Fianna Fáil. They were the architects at the beginning of 2010. And at that time, total general government expenditure at a quarterly rate was $29.2 billion in Q1 of 2010. But by the end of 2014, it had fallen to 19.6 billion, a fall of nearly €10 billion. But all of this and more is accounted by 11.3 billion fall in capital transfers at the same time. This is just stopping more bailout money going to the banks. That's why expenditure decreased. All of the rest of the cuts, which were severe, didn't add up to the savings, just as we warned. This is because cuts aren't savings. They lead to slower growth and increased poverty and puts pressure on different areas of government spending. In days to come, we'll hear, no doubt, from this government about its commitment to investment. But this is simply guff from a government whose sole area of expenditure that they did manage to cut was investment. In 2010, under the Fianna Fáil-led government, public investment was cut to €5.6 billion. But this government went further. By 2014, Fine Gael and Labour had slashed public investment to €3.5 billion. And they still literally don't have an investment plan, as you recently confirmed to me, Minister Noonan. But does anyone seriously suggest that cutting investment is the road to recovery? Ireland doesn't have too many flood defence systems, too many great public healthcare facilities, or too many ultra-modern schools. Let me tell you, Minister, we will all pay in the long run for this fiscal vandalism dressed up as fiscal rectitude. Of course, the government parties in Fianna Fáil see no problem with this. This is because their policies represent the interest of the few and not of the many. All the austerity parties claim that there has been no alternative to austerity. They always claim that, but they have been proved wrong. Sinn Féin has consistently argued that there is an alternative to these policies. Today we hear that there will be action taken on mortgage arrears. Whoa, mortgage arrears, no doubt, and interest rates as well. Is this from the same government that must have quoted 1,000 times by now that there is a memorandum of understanding and that the government can't interfere with the banks? Is this from the same government that voted down my bill on behalf of Sinn Féin to protect the family home that could have gone some way in preventing the tsunami of repossession proceedings? Is this from the same government that allowed the mortgage crisis to double in the first 2 years of your term? And we hear the government is going to lay down the line with the banks and interest rates. Are we supposed to take you serious in this? How many times has the Taoiseach and Minister told us that they are powerless? How many times have we on this side of the House, not for months, but for years, called on the Minister to call in the banks in relation to unsustainable mortgage debt and variable interest rates? But yet, we're going to have action now. As I said, there's a smell of an election in the air. As a Republican Party, we stand for equality. The burden of the crisis should have fallen on those who caused it and could afford to bear it. We know this government waited barely weeks before throwing out their promise to burn the bondholders. They caved in, just like Fianna Fáil had done before them, to the ECB, and not for the last time. Well, let's be clear, Sinn Féin's way is definitely not Frankfurt's way. We have a vision where banks owned by the people are not facilitating in evicting families, and where these banks are not allowed to dictate government policy. Under Fine Gael and Labour, the banks own the people. Sinn Féin would say no way to banks trying to rip off homeowners and evict them out to fatten up their own accounts. The recovery, ministers, can be broad-based, and it could benefit everyone. If policies are changed, it still can be fair and can be broad-based. We can build a country that works for all of its citizens. We have an alternative, and we have said that all of the priorities in the past should have been different. We said invest in our future. We said protect the hardest hit. But Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Labour, their policy was no bondholders left behind. Even now, as we speak, KPMG are down the road preparing to pay out, on behalf of the people, hundreds of millions of euro to junior bondholders, to vultures at IBRC. That is the legacy of this government's banking policy. Our recovery should mean more guards in our stations, more nurses in our hospitals, and more teachers for our children. And no, not teachers on job bridge, Minister Howland, actually paid young teachers. The improvement in government finances should be used to support a real recovery. It should be a recovery that benefits the majority, not a giveaway. that benefits the most well-off. We believe the need to invest in our shared future. Building affordable homes is an acute necessity in many areas. It creates decent, well-paid jobs, and the new homes generate income for the government that can be used for reinvestment purposes. But what today is really about is a government trying to get re-elected by promising the moons and the stars in their nod and wink fashion, having stolen the shirt off the people's back, and a Fianna Fáil party trying out a new policy because the government stole their old ones. What it should be about is about laying out a vision of a sustainable and fair recovery as we approach the centenary of the Rising. That is the debate Sinn Féin wants and is ready for. We challenge the logic that the way to create jobs is to cut taxes. Any investment creates jobs. Investment in the real economy creates sustainable jobs. The Minister's estimate that fiscal giveaway of 1.2 to 1.5 billion for 4 years would create 20,000 jobs. This is between 4.8 billion and 6 billion euro in total. There must be some of the highest paid jobs in the world. Far better investment is to create high quality in jobs and investing in the real economy. We hear today that the marginal tax rate must come down to attract our young immigrants back home. Is this a joke, Minister? Do you really believe that young people, in the face of 80,000 people leaving this state every year, left because of marginal tax rates were too high? Is this what the trauma of immigration is to be reduced to? What we hear today is the tax-cutting McCreevy style, with less of the logic and now delivered with a Limerick accent. It is a reckless hollowing out of the tax base just as we begin to grow. It is a puck in the eye for anybody who believes in a strong and sustainable economic model based on more than certain industries doing well. Fine Gael and Labour are just Fianna Fáil in reverse. And let me explain that. Because first you give us austerity, which damaged the economy. Then you kicked it when it was down. Now you stoke up the property prices in Dublin and other parts of the country. And now you've moved on to dangling the tax cuts. Exactly what Fianna Fáil did, but just in reverse. It is an attempt to bribe the people with their own money. But it repeats all of the stupid mistakes of the previous government. Let's be clear. We need better schools, better roads, more affordable homes and affordable childcare. We need to invest in the economy so that our children have a better future than we did. That is what Sinn Féin's pledge is to do. Instead, what we have today, we are promised tax cuts. And if we are to base it, as you say, on Budget 2015, we know that they will benefit the better off. Exactly the same errors as Fianna Fáil, a return to boom and bust. But this boom will pass most people by, and tax cuts which mainly benefit the better off won't provide the homes, the schools, the bus services, the childcare we need. The government's tax policy has moved the burden from those who can afford to pay it onto the shoulders who cannot afford anymore. This is exactly the opposite of what is needed. The record of this government shows that their tax cuts always mainly benefit the rich more than anybody else. They aren't interested in our children's future. For them, long-term economic management is getting as far as the next election, because they won't be around when the next generation is suffering the consequences of their decisions. And now that the public finances show 1.5 billion euro available for reinvestment, they act like a drunken sailor on leave. It is burning a hole in their pocket, but it belongs to the people of Ireland. It could be used to benefit the whole of the society, or at least the priority should be to protect the poorest, to ensure that those in low and middle income earners get something back. But your tax measures will do nothing of the kind. If you're on €500 a week or €5,000 a week and the marginal rate is cut by 1%, guess who is better off? You say that you're helping the middle earners, but the reality is your policies always end up benefiting the richest the most. And if any of that sounds familiar, it is because it is familiar. It is the policies of Fianna Fáil dressed up as something different. Tax cuts for the better off, too little investment, stoking up a property boom that passes most people by. And we know what happens next, a bust. This is the politics of failure. Boom and bust, the sequel. But there is an alternative, as I've said, and Sinn Féin is the party that wants to lead the whole nation to a better society. Our pledge is to protect the poorest, the most disadvantaged, and those whose aim is to get a better life for themselves and their loved one. These people are never going to benefit from rising prices in penthouse apartments. We also will pledge to use the improvements in government finance to build for the future and to build a fair recovery now. What that means is investing in our future, not tax-cutting your way to another boom and bust, and Fine Gael and Labour propose. There is an alternative to these policies. We have argued that fairness is the key. This is not a fair recovery, as we have seen today. The government and Fianna Fáil don't believe in fairness. The proof is in the pudding and in the eating. They believe in congratulating themselves for failure dressed up as success. People have been sacrificed rather than having made sacrifices. But what we will do is put money back into people's pocket the fair way, by scrapping water charges and ending the family home tax, and removing those on the minimum wage from the USC tax net. Ministers, politics is about choices. The choice now is to whether to invest in public services so that our young people, those with disabilities and others, have the same rights as others, so that our older people have the right to a bed and not a hospital trolley, so that those in the waiting list, the housing waiting list, have a right to a house, so that those in mortgage distress have a right to live in their home. This is the option that you have, or you can go down your option of tax cuts because an election is coming. Sinn Féin is committed to the former. We're committed to hiring more nurses, more midwives, more resource teachers, more special needs assistants immediately. That is the choice we would make. A fair recovery is possible. We can invest in the future. We can have a fair recovery. We can build in Ireland for all of its citizens. But this, unfortunately, is not possible under Fine Gael and Labour. You were unfair in the recession, and your plan for the recovery is unfair because you don't have it in you. You don't understand the word. And the reason I know that is because we and the Irish people have lived under 4 years of your unfairness and your austerity.